Welcome, everybody, to the pilot episode of the Untangling Conspiracies podcast. This podcast will take a fun, lighthearted look at some quirky conspiracies where a bunch of me and my friends will attempt to investigate whether there's any merit to these conspiracies, mixing historical analysis with modern speculation. So if you've been following this podcast channel for a while, you know I started out doing more on Canadian politics, and with the Canadian election being done, I figured let's pivot to a different topic area. And because, you need to excite yourself a bit, I chose conspiracies, as you do, of course. So I hope you guys will enjoy this, because it'll be a bit more lighthearted, not as serious as maybe politics in general. So to start us off today, we'll be looking at an interesting rumor that Justin Trudeau is actually the illegitimate son of Fidel Castro. Is this as crazy as it sounds? Could this theory actually have some historical merit? Let's investigate that today. So before we get into the juicy conspiracies, let's first introduce ourselves. So basically, I'm going to be joined today by someone who will hopefully be a pretty familiar voice to you soon as a recurring guest or even a host for the series. So Han, say hello.
Hello, I'm Han. I am Dutch. I studied international relations at the same university as Simon did. And I like conspiracy theories. They're fun. It's interesting to look at the stuff.
Yeah, we actually connected over conspiracies to some extent, right?
That we did.
I think if you go back in our history, we did this episode on conspiracies and international relations for the ISA podcast, which is a sister podcast of this podcast, which I did. I think I can call it a sister podcast, right?
Coincidence? I think not.
Exactly, yeah. But no, that was a fun one to do. I figured, if I'm bored and Han's bored, why not do something bigger together, right?
Yeah.
And I guess on that note, I myself am Simon, and I'll also be on this podcast pretty frequently, hopefully. And yeah, I've also been in Netherlands for a while. I'm currently in Brussels, of all places. And yeah, just enjoying life. And I'm hoping to enjoy more of the grayer, less established part of life in this podcast. So yeah. How's your week been, Han? How have you been doing?
Oof. Well, there hasn't been too many conspiracies in my week, I think. But generally, it's been pretty good. I've been working. I'm doing an internship right now, so it's been pretty busy. Yeah, just kind of exploring the life after COVID, which is kind of fun.
That's a bit of a big statement for you to say, considering you're living in the Netherlands right now. So,
oh,
but we shouldn't get into that right now.
That's not right? For another day.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Well, I guess talking a bit about conspiracies to talk about today, I'm going to introduce you a bit to how we're going to structure this episode before we get into it. Just because this is the first episode, the pilot episode, if you will. So yeah, the way we're going to do this is, first off, myself and the guest, so Han this time, and Han will probably be on many episodes as a co-host of some kind, hopefully, unless he bails on me, which would not be great. But yes.
That's so much pressure suddenly, jeez.
Oh, well, sweating. Anyways, so how this will be structured is we'll start with just posing the statement of the conspiracy, and then Han and I will give our initial impressions, and then we're going to go whether we agree or disagree with the conspiracy, our kind of thoughts about it, knowing nothing about it. And then we're going to go into a bit of the background of the conspiracy, and then we're going to go into some of the minutiae. So for this one in particular, I have about 3 main points I want to talk about to try and convince Han's mind and make him a believer in Trudeau's sketchy past, I guess. And then at the end, we'll see...
Sketchy roots.
That's a better way of putting it, is sketchy roots. And then by the end, we'll see if his mind has been changed, or our minds have been changed, for the better or the worse.
Perhaps.
So yeah. Let's introduce this conspiracy, and let's just say a blanket statement. So, is Justin Trudeau Fidel Castro's illegitimate son? Han, thoughts?
Well, I'm not too familiar with it. I've seen 1 or 2 pictures of Justin Trudeau. I obviously know what he looks like, and I've seen a few pictures of Fidel Castro. And I mean, they both have big noses. That's as far as I'm getting. But other than that, it seems pretty implausible.
Rank it out of 10. How much do you believe this conspiracy?
Well, it's not that unbelievable, but it's pretty unbelievable. I mean, Canadian Prime Minister, son of another Canadian Prime Minister, and then he's the son of a communist dictator. It's pretty far out. So let's give it I'll give it a 5. And
That's
that's
pretty
a,
plausible, though. A
I
5 is
mean,
like,
all right.
you're halfway convinced.
I'm halfway convinced. All right, let's make that a
Maybe 5
four
out of
then.
10, right?
But it's not. It's not like the lowest I would give something is like aliens founded the Mayans or something, which would be a 1. But this is still realistic. It's still about people. There is a scenario I can imagine in which this would be true. So let's give it a 4.
Okay, we'll lock into 4, and hopefully we'll bump it up to like an 8 by the end, right? Yeah, I'm just here to convince his mind.
You seem very convinced that you can convince me, or very confident of your skills.
I'll look, as another conspiracy podcast says, I'll come off the fence at the end as well. And I'm, as much as I like to play up the conspiracy, I mean, this is all seriousness. This is a real person I'm talking about. So I'm not going to say, oh, he's definitely the son of this person. But, I got to convince your mind, Han. You got to be a critical thinker.
Sure.
Considering,
I mean, that we are.
Yeah. And I mean, especially considering, as a fun fact, we both have bachelors in philosophy. So.
Yeah. So critical thinking is all we do.
Exactly. But before we can critically think about the evidence I'm going to present, we should first talk a bit about the background of this case. So I want to start by asking you, what do you know about Pierre Trudeau?
I know he's Justin's dad, and I knew he was also Prime Minister of Canada back in the 60s or 70s, quite a while ago.
70s, yes.
Yeah, 70s. So I know he was also on the Liberal Party, the same party as Justin, I think, and that's kind of where it ends. My Canada knowledge isn't great, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, and mine is hopefully a little better, and I have done a little research, I will admit, but Pierre Trudeau is somebody who I've always thought is one of Canada's more greater prime ministers, and just because he has a lot of accomplishments which really made Canada what it is today. So we'll go over them in a second. But before that, I also want to start by highlighting who Pierre Trudeau is and how he's a very, very interesting person. He's one of those people who would be a really great answer to give to those questions of which historical figure would you want to have a dinner with? Simply because of his background. So he comes from a rich family, but he's traveled the world in the 1940s. So I guess while doing his education in his 20s, he literally in the 1940s, he was like, I'm just going to go motorcycle through India. I'm going to go travel through China. I'm going to go look here. So he literally left Canada for 5 years to just travel the world with a backpack, which is pretty insane, right?
I mean, back in the 40s, this was a big thing, a special thing. Now it's just something 19-year-old people do to find themselves. I guess he was doing it too.
It was, but in Europe, though. He didn't stick to Europe. So he actually became, I think, the first Canadian to motorcycle through India, apparently. And he was one of the only Westerners in China during the beginnings of the revolution.
Oh, yeah. Shit. That was in the 40s as well, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was in the midst of it, unless I'm buying into the propaganda too much. But he had a very interesting world experiences. And that definitely made him become known once he returned to Canada as quite a different type of thinker, very liberally minded and with a breadth of worldly experiences to draw from.
Are we sure that Justin Trudeau's father is not Mao Zedong?
I mean, that's a different theory for another day, I guess. But when he did return, he became a professor of constitutional law, I believe, in Toronto or McGill, in one of the bigger cities in Canada. So he was also a very smart person. That eventually led him into 1965, where he entered politics, and he became, within a year or two, he became the Minister of Justice in Canada, as well as serving as the Attorney General of Canada. So, distinguished guy.
I mean, that's pretty impressive. Good CV.
And in 1968, he was elected Prime Minister. And that sparked off a wave of Trudeau mania. You want to take a guess at what Trudeau mania is?
Well, from the Canadians that I have met, I do know there's still a Trudeau mania going on right now, which is slightly worrying sometimes. I don't know what it was in the 60s, but I hope it didn't have the word True Daddy involved.
It most definitely did.
Oh, God.
Or the 1960s equivalent.
Was he the Canadian Beatles?
He basically was. And Pierre Trudeau was elected as, I think, the first bachelor in Canadian history. He was not married when he entered office. He was very different thinking, and according to the standards back then, he seemed quite attractive. So he was really a wave of fresh air, and wherever he went, there'd be stories of crowds of young women just falling around, that kind of stuff.
So he literally was like the Beatles.
If you think it was bad with Trudeau nowadays, it was worse back then, is from what I've heard.
Insane.
Exactly. But he did, I guess, get some policy through. So he did serve as a prime minister for quite a lengthy time, from 1968 to 1979 for his first term, so that's 2 terms, and then again from 1980 to 84.
Okay.
And during these times, he had several really big accomplishments, which I do want to stress before we get into, because I do think he's been one of Canada's best prime ministers in this sense. So he enabled the partition of the Constitution. So that means that he enabled Canada to leave the British system and become completely its own independent nation. So he oversaw that. He
Wow.
also established a Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, which set the precedent for many of the liberal values we have today, such as abortion, homosexuality, that kind of stuff. Those were all enshrined or began from roots there, as well as just being a very important document in the Canadian legal context. He also established official bilingualism, and he also established official multiculturalism in Canada. And finally, to top off this list of big accomplishments, he also temporarily defeated movements for Quebec sovereigntists. So this was an October crisis, which is basically some of a domestic terrorism crisis where sovereigntists kind of kidnapped government officials in Quebec.
Really? Jeez, when was this?
This was during his first years in office in the 1960s or so, I believe. Don't quote me too much. In the late 1960s,
Oh
sorry.
my God, that's a tough one to get thrown your way in your first year in office, I suppose.
Yeah, and what he did was he basically enacted martial law in Quebec or something, which was very heavily criticized, but he did manage to defeat it. So he shows a lot of resolve. Basically, when he wanted to get something done, he'd get it done, which, not to be too critical of his son Justin, isn't really the thing associated with Justin.
Oh, very careful. Tread
Yeah,
carefully now. If you ever want to,
yeah.
if you want to keep your Canadian citizenship.
I mean, it's not citizenship yet, so maybe I shouldn't do this episode at all. What are your thoughts on Justin Trudeau, his son?
Well, I gotta say, I'm not too knowledgeable about Canadian politics.
Hmm.
I think so. From what I do know, I think he has been doing all right. Although a little bit ineffectual in a sense because he doesn't have a majority, as far as I know. And then he did an election which didn't actually get him a majority either, which I think was your last podcast was on. Was that election?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if the listeners are listening, if we did post this pilot episode, there would be like 20 previous episodes on that election on this channel. So if you're
Yes.
interested, check those out.
All the good criticisms on Trudeau, find them at Simon's other podcast.
I mean, I'm not a hater of Trudeau. I think he's been served some tough cards, but I also feel like you were saying, he could have been able to get more done, because when he was initially elected in 2015, he did have a majority government. And many of his promises took a really long time to get enacted, if were not enacted at all. And that's led to, especially recently, a lot of criticism on his leadership abilities. So
Right.
he's the Trudeau mania has kind of worn off in Canada for the younger Trudeau. Let's get into the details of this conspiracy now, then. So first off, this is what I implore everybody to do, is to open a new tab, or once you get home, if you're listening while driving or anything, just pull up a picture of Justin Trudeau and pull up a picture of Fidel Fidel Castro.
Are you
Uh,
kind of spoiling the game there, Fidel Trudeau?
I was gonna edit it out, but now you're gonna make me leave it in, Han. So thank
I
you.
know.
But you've done this exercise, right, Han, or are you doing it right now? Tell me, do
I'm
you see any similarities between the two men?
I'm just making it. Yeah, oh, there it is. Well, they both have the same kind of mustache and also a big nose, like I said.
Hmm. And they have the same kind of curly black hair. They
Mhm.
seem similar facial structure. Some could say they could be somewhat related if you didn't know any better, right?
If you didn't know any better, if you just showed these two pictures next to each other without any context. Mm.
There's enough to make you think, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of the basis, somewhat, of this conspiracy theory, that Justin Trudeau and Fidel Castro, back in his prime, had very similar looks, if you want to say so. So could they have been related? And that's kind of what we're going to look at today. Um, are the pictures any somewhat convincing to you, Han?
Well, I mean, if I Google Fidel Trudeau, which I did accidentally actually, because I said you said it, then I just like typed in the thing I was saying as well. So there's a bunch of pictures here. One of them is from young Fidel Castro next to young Trudeau, and well, I mean, from certain angles, it's especially the nose. I think if you look at that facial structure, it's definitely the nose that sticks out, literally sticks out.
Yeah, and I mean, even like, not to be rude to the man, but if you also pull a picture of like Pierre Trudeau, you would say Justin resembles Fidel a bit more than he resembles Pierre.
Let me see. I'm gonna pull up those pictures just to make sure I can convince myself. Actually, I mean, Pierre's hair is quite different,
Yeah, the hair's a
isn't it?
big thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's mainly the hair. It's other than that. I mean, hmm. Well, there's some really weird pictures here I'm seeing. Oh God. Just for everybody listening, just Google Pierre Justin Trudeau, and then there is a picture with which is like a very odd combination of their two heads smushed together, but it's really creepy. It's oh God. People get into this way too much.
Uh, well, I guess we've seen a picture, so they can be quite like at a glance. I think there is something to make you think twice. But then again, pictures are pictures, right? Pictures, you need a timeline to support that. And that timeline kind of exists to some extent, if I can say so.
Does it now?
Yeah. Yeah. So first off, you have to know, as we established, Pierre was quite a different kind of thinker, right? Did you know one of his closest friends was Fidel Castro?
I did not actually.
Yeah, so basically, Pierre Trudeau had met Fidel earlier in his life, and they shared many similar kind of like socialist-leaning thinkings. I mean, Pierre wasn't a socialist, but he studied these political theories during his like scholarly lifetime, and he was a great admirer of what Fidel had accomplished in Cuba. And during Pierre's reign as prime minister, Canada enjoyed really good relations with Cuba, much to the dismay of the Americans and other partners, simply because Fidel and Pierre were really close friends in real life. They visited several times, actually, during Pierre's prime ministership.
Really now? I mean, I guess in the 60s, Cuba was kind of a hot topic. So being friendly with Cuba doesn't seem like a very Canada thing to do. From a
Hey,
European perspective, that is.
I guess we both have good healthcare, so.
Just bond over healthcare. Apparently, Fidel Castro was really into cows as well. I don't know if Pierre was into them.
Yeah, I, okay, I guess that kind of took me back. I don't know where I was going with that.
It's a kind of an odd sidetrack that we can explore at another day.
So beyond just kind of the facial like similarities and as well as the friendship, like it's Pierre and Fidel knew each other and were close friends. That's an established historical fact. There's also the point of Pierre and his young wife Margaret Trudeau, because you can't have a good infidelity case or a good scandalous romance without the other partner in this equation, right? Do you know anything about Margaret Trudeau?
What do you? What do you think?
What do I think of Margaret Trudeau?
Yes.
I think, as I'm going to explain about her backstory, I think it was a bit of a Princess Diana kind of situation almost. So
Explain.
we'll get into it.
Yeah.
I'll prevent her. So Margaret first met Pierre Trudeau in the late 1960s. She was 18 years old. He was 48. And he was also currently then the Minister of Justice for Canada.
I see. Yeah, so that's quite 30 years. That's significant.
It is to some extent. There are also maybe some power imbalances, and by all means, she was a pretty free-willed, free-spirited young woman, really looking to enjoy the 60s as they came to her, right?
I mean, exactly. They were the 60s, so I suppose the age difference is kind of overlooked.
But then again, also Pierre was known for being very open-minded and free-spirited himself. There were many rumors of his free-spirited nature in more, less appropriate senses as well. So we'll leave it at that. But eventually, as I mentioned, Pierre did get elected to office without being married. He was a bachelor at the time, and he eventually did reconnect with Margaret Trudeau, or Margaret at the time. I forgot her unmarried last name. And they reconnected and were married on March 4th, 1971. So, that seems like a good story, right?
The name is actually Sinclair.
Yes, that rings a bell.
Margaret Joan Sinclair.
Mm-hmm. So they were married, right? And it was a really big story. She was instantly really recognized because, a prime minister marrying is not something that happens every day. I mean, imagine if your beloved prime minister suddenly married. Wouldn't that cause crisis in the Dutch kingdom?
Well, I mean, especially because just not to go on about that for too long, it would be a big story because nobody's ever seen him with a woman at all.
Yeah,
He's
so
just married to the job. I don't know if Pierre was like that too, but I feel like the Beatlemania kind of thing that Pierre had going, Mark Rutte does not have that.
yes,
It's
yeah.
not a posse of women walking after him everywhere he bikes.
uh, but yeah, anyways, so they got married, and to support this timeline a bit more, as my research has uncovered, Justin would have been conceived around the time they got married, between March and June of 1971. Okay?
Spicy.
Yeah, don't ask me why I looked this up. So this is just simply for research purposes.
Of course, of course.
So officially, to I guess support your narrative a bit of maybe this not happening, they didn't visit Cuba during that time. The first time they officially visited Cuba was, I think, in 1976. However, as my extensive research has uncovered, they took a honeymoon to the Caribbean in 1971, around the time they got married. They
Oh.
visited Barbados, Tobago, and Trinidad. And the press also reported that they left for an unidentified nearby island, which the press didn't bother to identify. Any thoughts?
Well, it could be Cuba. It's a pretty
Exactly.
big island.
And if you're in the Caribbean and your best buddy Fidel is around the corner, maybe you could just hop by to Barbados, and you guys could have a nice what's the word, a nice tryst or whatever.
Have a drink, just sit on the beach, smoke some big cigars. I mean, Fidel Castro was a big fan of those. I think if you look at the pictures.
Yeah, I mean, both of them. I think both Pierre and Margaret were also avid fans of other illicit substances, so stuff could
Oh.
happen. So there is some. They were in the region. So I guess the timeline isn't that insane, right? Or am I hypothesizing too much here?
Well, I mean, it's within the realm of possibilities, right? This is before the time where every phone had a GPS for the kids out there. So,
And the press actually respected it, because the reason they didn't know what island they went to is because the press was literally asked not to come along.
can you imagine the press actually saying yes to that nowadays?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a
It's
lot of the
nuts.
arguments I see for this theory not happening, I mean, it probably didn't happen, but just to like push back at them was like, oh, she was the most famous woman in Canada. There's no way she could have secretly ran across the world to Fidel Castro and had an affair with him. But they were in the region around the time, and the press had admitted they left her out of their sights for a while.
Well, I mean, 1 + 1 = 3, I
I,
guess.
my math isn't great, so that works for me, right?
Clearly not the strong suit. I mean, philosophy students generally aren't known for their math skills, so
It's all logic here, baby.
exactly. A + A = B.
Yeah, mine is Fidel plus Margaret equals a Justin. So
Oh, maybe. But maybe I can interject with another idea because
go for it.
for any Dutch fears, and we do have those, there is a book called "The Discovery of Heaven." Discovery of Heaven. That's it.
Hmm.
And in that book, there is a kid that is born from a
Okay.
threesome.
Ooh.
Yes,
I
and it is
mean,
a threesome in Cuba with two men in the sea. So maybe it could have been. I mean, you said they were free spirited thinkers, right? I mean, we don't have to. You're assuming now that it is Margaret and Fidel, but maybe.
I will, as I was hinting to earlier, it has been somewhat rumored that Pierre was also free thinking in that sense. I'm
Exactly.
not going to say
Why?
anything more because I don't want to sully on his good name, and I do respect him. And
I mean,
being
this is
free
this
thinking
is.
doesn't really affect how I perceive him, but for others it might. So,
On the other hand, these were the '60s.
or 70s, but 70s are less
Well, I mean,
exciting. But once you're in
I
Cuba, you're in
guess
Cuba, right?
exactly. What happens in the Caribbean stays in the Caribbean.
True. So I mean, I think with this like unidentified trip, there is some possibility. It's not without the realm of possibility that they could have, intermingled in some senses. However,
Intermingled in some senses. That's a very nice way to put it.
I'm a diplomatic guy.
Yeah, clearly.
I don't want to step on enemy's shoes. So, anyways, well, this might have been a great night for Margaret and Justin, or sorry, Margaret and Pierre and whoever else might have joined them. Who knows? The marriage did not stay that great. Eventually, it did disintegrate. So Pierre, being the Prime Minister of Canada, had a pretty high stress job, and basically Margaret was left to raise the children they got together on her own, and that was very stressful to her. She was still very young, and she wanted to be very out and vocal.
Yeah, if your husband is 30 years older, there's going to be some differences.
Exactly. No matter how much your personalities might align on a spiritual level, I suppose. And
On a cosmic level.
yes, but this did lead to a number of high-profile, like publicized incidents of just stuff happening. So there was a very rocky days. Apparently, this is funny. I saw a footnote this somewhere. I can't really confirm it, but Margaret was known to smuggle drugs in Trudeau's luggage on trips abroad. So I guess you could do that if you're the wife of the prime minister.
I guess. I mean, it just goes to show the free-thinking nature.
Yeah.
Right?
But even more so, she was known to party with people who weren't Trudeau. So most famously, on the night of Trudeau's re-election campaign, which he eventually lost in 1979, she was pictured out in a club, Studio 54, dancing away in a very provocative dress, apparently, for the times. And I believe Andy Warhol was also near them.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, and beyond that, she was known, or she even heavily, I think, she admitted herself to having an affair. Guess of whom?
Andy Warhol?
No. No, but that could have been. It was.
I was just going to ask. Does she have any other kids that maybe share a very uncanny resemblance to Andy Warhol?
I'll get into that, but not with Andy Warhol, but that would also be interesting. I think the reason everyone's focused on Fidel Castro is because most people who love conspiracies are a bit more right-wing leaning and they hate communists, and this is more of a move against Justin, even though it can't really have been his fault. So I'll talk about that later.
It's like the birther movement, in a
yeah,
sense.
it's just like whatever.
Except
you got to respect the man, not the stuff.
Fair enough.
But regardless, guess who she had an affair with? No other guesses?
Give me a hint.
It was a U.S. politician.
Oh my God. A U.S. Was he president?
No, but I guess close-ish. It was Ted Kennedy.
No way.
Yeah,
Really?
She admitted to that. So I don't know if he confirmed it, but she admitted to that in, like, I think memoirs and stuff.
That's crazy.
And she's also been associated with a number of other, highly promiscuous people, including most of the Rolling Stones.
Oh God.
So there is some, free-mindedness there. But eventually,
indeed,
she did divorce. They did divorce. She has 3 children, Justin being the eldest, and then 2 other Trudeau children. So Alexander, Sasha, and also Michelle. And then she, I think, had 2 other children with when she remarried later on. And she's still a pretty vibrant part, somewhat, of Canadian landscape. Not like uber well known, but as Justin Trudeau's mother, she has made a bunch of appearances, and she's done a lot of work on mental health as well as that kind of stuff. So she's had a good twilight of her life,
She's got to be pretty old at this point, right?
Well, she was 18 in the 1970s.
That is true. So. That is true. Yeah, but even then, I mean, if you're 18 in the 60s, what makes you that now? Like 70-ish?
Yeah, something like that. She's still around. She still does appearances and stuff. So, and
crazy.
She wrote a book also where she kind of detailed like some of these experiences. So if you're more interested in her life,
is there no mention of Fidel Castro anywhere or
not in
fun
her
trips
notes.
In Cuba?
Not in her notes.
Yet.
But this brings us to my third kind of point in favor of the Fidel angle. So the Trudeau family has always been suspiciously highly praising of Fidel Castro. I'm going to pull something up and I'm going to read you something. All right. This was a quote from an essay that Alexander Sasha, so Justin Trudeau's brother, wrote on Fidel Castro. Quote, I grew up knowing that Fidel Castro had a special place among my family's friends. We had a picture of him at home, a great big man with a beard who wore military fatigues and held my baby brother Michel in his arms. When he met my little brother in 1976, he even gave him a nickname that would stick with him his whole life, Misha Mish. A few years later, when Michel was around 8 years old, I remember him complaining to my mother that my older brother and I both had more friends than he did. My mother told him that, unlike us, he had the greatest friend of all. He had Fidel. This goes on. Alexandra also wrote...
Just interject. Be like, don't worry. You've got friends. You've got a friend in a communist dictator, and he could just go back to school and be like, I don't need you guys. I've got Fidel frickin' Castro as a friend.
But this is a serious article. He publishes as an op-ed in the Toronto Star under his own name.
And that's a serious paper as well.
That's a direct quote from that. It's been kind of buried a little bit more now, but I've found a direct quote from that. And it's kind of worrying, considering I can see why some Canadians are a bit more suspicious of the Trudeau-Castro, intermingling in that sense.
Well, I mean, it is politically sensitive, right? I mean,
Yeah.
even without the whole Justin being his son thing, Fidel Castro is pretty controversial
Yeah.
in and of itself.
Yeah.
Just being friends with Fidel Castro is quite a controversial thing.
Yeah, and never mind praising him, as Alexander does later on in the article. Like, to finish the quote, he wrote, "His intellect is one of the most broad and complete that can be found. He is an expert on genetics, on automobile combustion engines, on stock markets, on everything. Combined with a Herculean physique and extraordinary personal courage, this monumental intellect makes Fidel the giant that he is." This is a direct quote.
Is that really a direct quote? Because it seems like Herculean physique. What was this written? Wasn't the man like completely ancient?
Well, this was, I believe, from memories made from childhood.
Right.
When he was probably in the prime of his life, and it's a statement, and it was a real statement he wrote.
That is. I mean, I'm just laughing in my head about the genetics thing because I just mentioned the thing about cows, and I gotta tell the thing about cows. Fidel Castro apparently really liked milk, and he really liked milk cows, and he did his absolute best to breed the perfect milk cow that was dog-sized. That was his great vision. He wanted like a dog-sized cow in every house that could provide milk for every household. Okay, sorry, that was a complete tangent, but
I haven't heard
that's actually true though. That's not a conspiracy.
Having a dog-sized cow would be really efficient.
I mean, Fidel Castro was a visionary in that sense. I mean, it's completely out there, but can you imagine being like, hey man, I need some milk for my tea. Oh, that's all right. Here, Fido, come here. Just put in some milk, some fresh from the cow.
But this Trudeau-Castro intermingling, if I keep calling it that, but I'm going to keep doing it, continued to other extents too. So Pierre Trudeau sadly died in 2000. Guess who was the only sitting world leader to visit his funeral?
Oh no.
It was Fidel Castro.
But that's kind of sad as well.
That is kind of sad, but
when was it? When did he die? 2000?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess he wasn't the best of friends with not Bill Clinton, but George Bush.
That's
too bad.
Typically, there's always been a bit more fraught relationship sometimes between the prime ministers and presidents occasionally.
But still, though, I mean, are there any pictures of Fidel Castro consoling the grieving family? Yes.
Yeah. If you search it up, you'll find some.
Crazy.
And when Fidel died himself, Justin Trudeau was the first foreign leader to issue a statement. Can I read some of the statement for you?
Please do.
"It is with deep sorrow that I learned today of the death of Cuba's longest-serving president. Fidel Castro was a larger-than-life leader who served his people for almost half a century. A legendary revolutionary and orator, Mr. Castro made significant improvements to the education and health care of his island nation. While a controversial figure, both Mr. Castro's supporters and detractors recognized his tremendous dedication and love for the Cuban people, who had a deep and lasting affection for El Comandante. I know my father was very proud to call him a friend, and I had the opportunity to meet Fidel when my father passed away. It was also a real honor to meet his three sons and his brother, President Raul Castro, during my recent visit to Cuba. On behalf of all Canadians, Sophie and I offer our deepest condolences to the family, friends, and many, many supporters of Mr. Castro. We join the people of Cuba today in mourning the loss of this remarkable leader."
That is, I mean, it's very heartfelt.
And he got a lot of pushback on this because it's a big statement to make about somebody who was considered by many people to be a dictator.
It's still Fidel Castro. It's not just any old like liberal leader from any country. I mean, the fact that they were friends just that their parents were friends. Just although the one thing that does strike me of this is that he said that he's interested. He was very honored to have met him at his father's funeral. Did he not meet him before then?
He did.
Is that
According to records, I believe he did. So I think this was kind of maybe downplaying the closeness of the relationship. And I will say, given the backlash, Trudeau did skip Fidel Castro's funeral. So
okay, so maybe that could be a strike against. I mean, if it's actually your dad, it could also. So just to think with you here, just to go with the theory, it could also be that they never were told. It's just so is the mom's still alive, right? What's her name again? I forget. Margaret. Yeah. So Margaret's still alive. When she does pass away, can we expect some extra juicy notes?
If we do, we'll update this podcast.
We will. If we do, we will remove this podcast because it will no longer be a conspiracy theory. It'll just be a fact.
Although part of me thinks, considering she was very open about having affairs, maybe the fact she didn't admit to this is a strike against it. But then the other hand, there's a thing about having affairs and then about actually having a child with somebody else.
And also that child being prime minister and being in politics. Even if you do admit to being slightly promiscuous, there is definitely a limit to what you would admit. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if people open up and still keep some dirty secrets held back, you know?
Yeah. No, and that's understandable, in my opinion. I'm surprised she even admitted to some. But then again, she had to sell a book, so.
Well, I mean, she was 18 in the 60s, so.
Yeah. Okay, my final piece of evidence, and this is maybe the strongest or maybe the weakest, depending on how much you trust a third-hand testimony.
All right.
So apparently, allegedly, and this is just the rumors I've heard, the oldest son of Fidel Castro committed suicide. So he did that, right?
Yeah.
He also wrote a suicide note. And allegedly within this suicide note, he said that Justin Trudeau was his half-brother, the product of an affair between his father and Justin's mother. And he also complained that Fidel would often bug him about not being as successful as Justin.
Oh my God.
This is a rumor, so I don't want to put too much weight on this.
I mean, that is... I think that is... It's slightly too good to be true for the theory. So I think I'm gonna not believe that.
But it's interesting though. It's but honestly, I do think this is somewhat some message board made this up to get more anti-Trudeau sentiment up there. But it's really easy.
True. It's really easy to spread third. I mean, the guy isn't alive anymore to confirm it or disconfirm it, you know. So it's I guess I'm gonna chalk this one up to too convenient.
Yeah, part of me though, it'd be hilarious to see Fidel Castro to his other son. Oh, Justin's so much more successful than you. Look at him running a country.
Why are you not Prime Minister of Canada yet? You're a failure.
I just love the idea of Fidel Castro just spreading his seed around the world, becoming pulling a puppeteer, pulling the strings.
Oh my God, that's not a good image. Just imagine that. Imagine if every prime minister just turns out to be Fidel Castro's son.
It'd be funny though. It'd be really funny. That's the timeline I wish I could see.
So the United Nations would just be Fidel Castro's family gathering.
I miss Fidel's UN rants. Those were legendary.
Yeah, I mean we got what's the dictator guy? Mubarak, I think it was, with his legendary UN rant. I think it was Mubarak. But yeah, I mean, Fidel Castro was a very colorful figure, you know, disregarding the horrors he did as well, as a dictator. I mean, Cuba was definitely not a paradise, but it's just an interesting person. And this whole mythology around it just makes it slightly more interesting, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, definitely, I remember in my youth, I did read some of his writings, and they're remarkably coherent.
Be careful what you say now. I mean,
I don't support him, but it's
reading communist writings.
But it's interesting it's good to broaden your perspectives. I didn't really agree with it, but sure. I'm surprised by how well he was at writing, how good he was at writing. So, yeah.
I'm all for that, to be honest, because I've read a lot of stuff from people that turned out to be anti-Semites or Nazis, which doesn't go fully against what they wrote, but
Yeah.
it's controversial though.
Okay. Well, I guess we should start to wrap up here. And so, Han, tell me, what are your thoughts now? Has your mind been changed at all?
I think slightly, not entirely. Like, I'm not going to give you that 8 out of 10 that you aimed for at the beginning, because I feel like that's going to be too much, man. But the things you told me about Margaret and I didn't know that, right? About Margaret and the fact that they had some squabbles and she had some more things and all that, the stuff that the brother wrote, that Trudeau's brother wrote as well, was, if that is not misinformation or disinformation, then that is
It's
pretty
very
interesting.
in her memoir. She does write about this stuff, so maybe she lied about it, but it was known and it was highly publicized, and there's enough to go around. I think she was pretty, 60s-ish child.
Yes, very open, free
Yeah.
love and that kind of stuff. Yeah, just the idea of it is fun to keep in mind, and I think I'll give it a I'll give it a I'll bump it up to a 6, maybe like between a 5 and a 6, because I feel like it's still not believable enough, but I would like it to be true because it's just so much more fun.
Yeah, I very much fall into that camp. What do you think of the continuing praise of the Trudeau dynasty, if I can call it that, about Fidel Castro? Because I think that's a very interesting. He is a family friend, but you are a very politically involved family.
Well, I think that's something I didn't know as either, that they were actually friends and they so publicly praised a communist leader. I think, especially, I'm a European and I don't know that much about Canada because, to be honest, Canada's always kind of shared, like, overshadowed by U.S. politics. I know. I can see you looking at me from all the way from Brussels, and I can just feel the reproach. But you gotta see
Yeah.
that you always just feel like Canada is always like the buddy of the West, and it's buddies with the US, it's buddies with the UK, and well, Cuban isn't really a buddy. It's not really part of that friend group, so it feels off.
It does. I don't know. It feels like it's like that one eccentric kid being friends with like the weird kid in class. Like
I
the unlikely stuff
guess.
friendships. Just
Well, it's not the weird kid in class so much as the kid that picks fights with everybody.
true.
just punches the other kids in the nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Like
is.
he hangs out with a Russian skinhead kid.
It's very pure of him to though. He's very open, accepting, and as I will say, I think many of his accomplishments or like his effects on Canada would not have happened if he was not who he was. So being so open-minded, being so, I guess, worldly, if I can call it that. Like policies like multiculturalism in Canada, I'm not saying he was the sole force behind it, but he was in power while they got implemented. I think it was a result partially of kind of who Pierre was. So
Well, I do get so the anti-communist thing wasn't as big in the 60s, or at least the pro-communist thing was a lot different in the 60s, because there's a lot of, well, pretty famous people that were vocally pro-communist regimes. Jean-Paul Sartre, to name a very big one, was a documented Maoist. So I guess just for us from this day and age, being pro-communist in a Western country just feels like a bit of a stretch. It just feels weird because communism just feels like a big bad in my head. It never really lived, like, we never really lived during times where communism was actually a relevant ideology.
I will say though that Pierre wasn't a communist in that sense. I know many.
No.
He often, with the right wing vocal online, that minority, they do call him a communist in his socialist policies. He was very much more liberal, and I think he disapproved of many of Fidel's more totalitarian aspects. So
Yeah, but I guess I mean that the divide between communism and other countries and other ideologies isn't as large as it might seem to us
Mm,
as now. Because I mean, if you read a history book, it's all about the Cold War and how the Red Scare was a thing in the U.S. and everybody was really afraid of communists and they wouldn't like it. It was such a big thing in history in my head that it just feels completely crazy that a Western leader would be buddies with Fidel Castro, which I guess makes it more interesting that the Trudeau family kind of kept up that friendliness with Fidel Castro after the fall of communism, basically.
yeah, yeah. No, it's an interesting note, in Canadian relations, and we've always been friendly with Cuba. Like, I mean, if you wanted to go to Cuba, you couldn't fly there via America; you'd fly there from Canada. So,
Really? Well,
yeah,
that's fun. Just
yeah,
go to Toronto and take a flight to Havana.
yeah. Just simply because there was an embargo in Cuba, right? Until like I think
Right.
only 5 years ago, or so when Obama
Only
lifted it.
recently, I think Obama did it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's something I
but
remember
before
too.
then, it was basically Canada. Is how you got in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
Hmm.
interesting. My personal perspectives on this conspiracy, as much as I would love it to be true to some extent, I do kind of think it's something that, knowing Canadian politics a bit more than you, there's been a lot of anti-Trudeau sentiment, and a lot of people love to call him a communist, and just the
Right.
idea of him being the son of one of the most vile communist dictators is an idea
Yeah.
too tempting for them to resist.
For sure.
So
It's kind of like the suicide note. It might be a bit too convenient. So
yeah,
like you see he's a communist, he's the son of a communist. I told you.
yeah, but I will admit the pictures do look similar. But then again, a lot of people look similar to other people in pictures.
This is true. Yeah, this is true.
Hmm. Okay, to wrap it up a bit, whenever I do podcasts, I like to end it on a fun question, and I'm gonna do in this series. I'm gonna do fun questions, kind of related to the topics at hand, but a fun one. So let's look at Fidel real quick. We're not gonna linger too long because we've been going for a while. But you know how Fidel was, known for one thing beyond being Trudeau's father. He was known for surviving assassination attempts.
A lot of them.
Exactly. And he didn't die from them. So,
It was
Han,
basically like a Rasputin. But yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So, Han, imagine Justin Trudeau suddenly found out that, ooh, it's actually true and I need to bury this path to my past. And Castro was still alive. And he hired you, Han, to kill Castro. How would you assassinate him?
Um well so to go back to my milk story, that
Oh,
I'm
this
not
is a
gonna
good one.
force you. To go back to the milk story, I would take a dog. I would disguise him as a cow, and I would put a bomb in the dog, and then just have it walk, just like set it loose in Cuba, and then somebody's gonna find it and be like, "Oh shit, this is exactly what the supreme leader was looking for," and then they take it, right, and then they show it to Fidel Castro. And Fidel Castro just cannot like contain his excitement. He's like, "Oh my god, finally! I knew! All my prayers, all my dreams, hopes, all my hopes and dreams come true." So then he runs to the dog that looks like a cow, and then it explodes. Bam!
Uh,
No more Fidel Castro.
you could even go more, I guess, more extreme with it and commit your infinite resources to actually manufacturing this dog cow hybrid, but with a little caveat that its milk is
Oh no!
slightly arsenic, and then introduce it to Castro, and then slowly poison the Cuban population.
Oh my god! But I mean, that's cruel because then I'm killing all of Cuba. I mean, I'm already sacrificing one innocent dog to kill a great man that is very impervious, has seemed quite impervious to assassination attempts. So I feel like the dog is the most sacrificed. I'm not going to poison an entire nation just to kill the guy.
On the bright side, Cuban has a good healthcare system, so they could, replenish themselves a bit. So it'd be kind of like a Soviet Union thing where you just deplete their resources until they collapse upon itself, and capitalism takes over.
Well, I mean, Fidel Castro, just again with the milk facts, Fidel Castro was known for eating 14 scoops of ice cream.
Ooh, I mean, who wouldn't though?
Well, lactose intolerant people for one, and for two, just anybody who doesn't want to eat 14. That's so much ice cream. That's so much sugar. My God, I'm getting just getting diabetes just by thinking about it. My God.
You know what's gonna scare you out now? Every time you see a
Oh no.
picture of Trudeau eating ice cream,
Oh God.
and
I
you'll be
mean, if
like,
there,
connect the dots.
I mean, he was here in the Netherlands recently. I should have bought him like too big of ice cream. You're like, hey, Justin, would you like some ice cream? How many scoops?
14, please.
40. And then I'll just run back to my house, I'll take a picture, I'll run back and I'll post it on 4chan and just look at it explode.
But would this be better proof of you than that suicide note theory?
Yes. I mean, everybody knows, it's well documented that people who like milk, that is, liking milk is hereditary, just like lactose intolerance. Lactophilia is also quite hereditary.
Well, I think lactophilia is a great way to end this episode on, the first pilot episode. And any final thoughts? Any goodbyes you want to say, hon?
Well, I guess drink milk.
That's a good way to end it, yeah. Strong bones,
Got milk?
That's why he survived, those assassination attempts.
Exactly. Just drank so much milk that he was literally, if you drink enough milk, you will be able to withstand anything. So there, Friesland Campina, you can wire the money to my account. It's all right. I can do marketing for any kind of diary-based product. Thank you.
Okay, great to hear. I think that's a great promising career future for you. And yeah, no, to the audience, thanks for listening in. If this ever did go public, I think it's been a great episode, so maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. We'll talk about it later. If you enjoyed, leave a comment, leave a like, leave a subscription. Tell me what you think about this new direction that I'm taking. Will it get me fired from a new job I recently started? I hope not. But
will it get you expelled from Canada?
Oh God, don't mention that. That's still on my mind. And if you have enjoyed and you want to maybe participate someday, drop us an email. I think the email of the podcast is in the subscription below, in the description below, is in the description below. So yeah, shoot me a message. You can join Han and I there. But yeah, until next time then, goodbye and drink milk.
Bye.